Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning from wherever you're joining us from today in the world. My name's Sarah, and I'm the Program and Event Manager at the Reactor in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to a Microsoft Reactor Sydney live stream event and another episode of our Devs Down Under series. I'd like to welcome back Brad McCoy and introduce Ben Poe. So Brad started his career as a software engineer at TripAdvisor and then got into DevOps and moved into Fintech where he led the cloud engineering team at Temenos as engineering manager. He is now working as head of cloud engineering at Moula, and Brad is an advocate for cloud native and open source technologies. Ben was formerly an architect of physical buildings. He's now transitioning into being a cloud architect for infrastructure, working as a cloud engineer with Moula, where he puts his Azure, Kubernetes, and Terraform skill set to good use. So you'll see that I've put into the comment section a link to check in, and the event code is 14255, where you'll find additional resources from today, including a link to our YouTube channel and also the survey with this, which will get you guys to do with the same event code 14255. We'll be speaking for about an hour today, so 45 minutes with about 10 minutes for questions. However, do send us your questions throughout whatever platform you're on in the comment section or the Q&A, and between Brad, Ben, and myself, we'll answer as many as possible. There will be an on-demand version available of this straight after on our YouTube channel, which we did share the link with you. So if there's anything you missed, there will be that version available later today. But for now, I'd like to hand the floor over to Brad and Ben to begin. So thank you both, and over to you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for having us again as well. Ben, can you go to the next slide, please? Sorry, so just go back. So this is a two-part series. So we'll be going over part one today, which is, so the series will be essentially multi-region AKS clusters in Azure. So this part will go over specifically front door, and then the second part will go more deep dive into gotchas, best practices around having multi-region clusters. So a lot of businesses at the moment have requirements to have that multi-region. We'll cover basic introduction to front door, provisioning front door. We'll go over how you can use domains, routes, and backend pools, talking about rules engine and WAF, and then we'll show you how we implemented it as well, followed by Q&A session. So we'll also go over the differences between front door version 1 and 2. So version 2 is in preview at the moment, which we're using ourselves, not in production. So in production we use V1, and then we're starting to play around with front door 2 as well. So yeah, you can see here in the agenda, intro to front door, we'll do provisioning front door, and then talk about the architecture a little bit as well. And then, so what is front door? Front door is a fast, reliable, and modern secure cloud CDN with intelligent threat protection. So it's essentially a layer 7 load balancer, and it has a lot of great things like WAF capability, and it really puts a lot of the security features on your traditional load balancers. And then it supports static content and dynamic application acceleration, TLS and SSL offloading, so you can have end-to-end TLS. The web application firewall, cookie-based session affinity, URL path-based routing, and then also free certificates and multi-domain management, which is really cool. And the difference between front door and application gateway. So really, front door is a global service. So application gateway, it's a regional service, whereas if you want to go like multi-region, it's good to have front door. So you can have both of them as well. So you can have a front door talking to application gateway, but the real difference is that front door is global, and it must be in the same subscription as the services that you want to talk to, unless you're talking to like IPs, etc. So this is the use case that we have, And in part 2, we'll also go over a lot of this architecture as well. So here's this one. I'll share the link with. It's about it's a AKS baseline for multi-region. So it's quite a cool diagram. So you can see here that on the right we have front door. This is your main entry point. In our case, because we're using V2, we're not using application gateway here. So we took that out. We're just straight front door to the load balancer. And we're using a private AKS cluster. So that's more secure. So we have to go through a jump box to get into if you want to use kubectl, or it's just more hardening around. We can't just do it from our computer and execute commands, etc. So this is, I'll just quickly go back. So this is what this series will be about. We'll be talking a lot over this architecture and just saying how you can leverage front door to support this, and a few gotchas and just sharing our journey along the way of doing this. So now I'll hand you over to Ben to talk more about the implementation of front door. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks, Sarah, for the introduction. So I'm just going to go over quickly what the differences between front door version 1 and version 2 are. Version 2, as Brad mentioned, it's still in preview. Last we heard, it's a couple months away before being generally available. Now, what you see here, this portion, this is front door version 1, whereas in front door version 2, what it had included is it added the Azure CDN and the Web Application Firewall functions, capabilities, and packaged them as a single resource, you could call it. Now, we're just going to go straight into provisioning an Azure front door instance. As I mentioned earlier, there are 2 types of front door. So if you actually try to create a resource and you typed in front door, you'll get these 2. So that's the version 1 and version 2 being standard premium. And Web Application Firewall, that's a piece that you would bolt on into front door itself. So upon completing the provisioning, what you get is a standard front door look-in portal. This is the version 2. Now, the few things that you would need to configure in front door, firstly, it's the domains, the routing rules, and backend pools. In front door, you have these 3 bits, the domains, origin groups, and routes, and I'll go through each of them individually. So domain itself, when you create front door, you get a standard azurefd.net domain name. So in this case, we had called it Moula-Cloud Engineering. But in most cases, you would probably want to have your own custom domain name, which in this case, we created one that's called cloudengineering.bradmccoy.io. So that way it's obscured that you have your own custom domain name and it routes to the services that you want it to. And in order to do that, to create one of these custom domains, you add it, and firstly, you just provide a name, and Azure will need to validate that you are the owner of said domain name. So what you would have to do is in your DNS provider, in this case, I think it was AWS. We just have to add a text record and an A record to confirm that this name is actually valid. Azure will give you a key that you need to put in as a text record. And once it passes that, your DNS will be able to redirect any traffic that goes from cloudengineering.bradmccoy to go to the Azure front door domain name. So that gets you through the first step. And the next thing is origin groups. In front door version 1, this is actually called the backend pool. So what it does is once you get into here, you are trying to give endpoints that you want your services to access. In this case, we've got the Azure Kubernetes Service Load Balancer. So you just add it into here. And how front door also works is with these origin groups, you can have multiple endpoints in there that front door will just load balance and say, 50% of the traffic goes to this particular load balancer and 50% goes to the other, which is how we're planning to do this in the whole multi-region thing in part 2, where will have a Kubernetes cluster in, say, Australia East and another in Australia Southeast. So that way, your traffic will get diverted partly based on your geographical location. So if you're, say, in Sydney, it's a higher chance of you getting the Australia East endpoint rather than the Southeast. And it also helps in scenarios where this origin group, it has health probes in it that verifies that the endpoints are actually healthy. So back to the earlier example with Australia East and Australia Southeast, say for whatever reason, if there was an outage in one of the regions, the health probe would be able to pick up that particular endpoint is down. And instead of doing a 50-50 split of traffic, it'll just point all traffic to the actual healthy region. And that way it ensures that you have a higher degree of availability in your application. And the last bit, the thing that ties it all together, is the routing rules, or just called route in version 2. So this is how you tell it that you go from any traffic that goes to that specific domain and ends in /captain or /star. Star being a wildcard, and in this case, we just went with a generic /star that points all traffic to the AKS load balancer. But this can also be used in multiple ways. So if we go back to here, if you were to, say, create an option where /API goes to a function app and /something else goes to, say, your static web pages, that's how you also divert traffic from, say, cloudengineering.bradmccoy.io/main. You might put in your routes to bring that to retrieve a static web page, where /API might go to your Kubernetes load balancer. That's just a couple of ways that you could use the routing rules. And because you have the option of terminating the HTTPS connection at front door, which Brad mentioned earlier, that ensures that once your TLS is done here, you can actually pass in HTTP traffic down to the origin groups, and it's still secure in that aspect. That's stuff that you can handle in the routes, and that gives you the option here where accepted protocols is HTTP or HTTPS, and you get to enforce HTTPS. So the last bit then is the Web Application Firewall and Rules Engine. I might skip to the Web Application Firewall before we get to the Rules Engine, because that's part of the configuration that we had earlier. So one of those, I suppose, benefits that you get with Web Application Firewall, by default, you have a whole bunch of these OWASP guideline rules that Azure bundles into your application. So it by default enables preventing all these kind of attacks that it's just constantly updated by the OWASP guidelines. OWASP standing for Open Web Application Security Project. It's up here. So this ensures that your application is just more secure from the internet, and that's just the standard managed rules. And you can also add custom rules to it that gives you options such as, like in this case, if your application is Australia specific and that you don't want to have any traffic that's, say, from any other country, because for whatever reason you just want to keep it more secure, and you can only allow local traffic. So you just create a custom rule, which is just over here. In the custom rule, you add block non-Australian traffic, enable it, and priority. So you just set that this priority is a relatively arbitrary number. I believe it goes from 0 to 1,000. So it assesses your it assesses the criteria based on the rule, and if it matches 1, it passes. So in this case, what I had set is if the location is not Australia, then deny traffic. And this is it's not a select one thing. You can have it to go, like, say, if we're doing an Asia Pacific type thing. So you can tick on Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, all the Southeast Asian countries as well. So that way you can have it in a relatively fine-grained level of firewall rules. So it's not just geolocation. You can also be very specific, like only allow certain IP addresses. So there's quite a lot of control that you can do in the web application firewall level. So that's all just part of the security features that we have in front door. So that's this last piece here. So just to recap, this is where your host is. This is where your services live. And routes, it's just telling it which URL paths gets to which service, and the security that just wraps over the top of all of it to ensure that your traffic is secure. And the last piece was the rules engine. And that's another item that you can bolt on to your to your routes. And this gives you, again, further level of control onto your front door. So think of this like an if this then that type scenario. So for instance, say if the device type is mobile, append a certain header or delete a certain header, or you can even route it to a completely different path than the default routing rule that you had done. Or say if your query string had a certain thing. What we have recently used this rules engine for was our app has an authentication with 0. Or was it Okta? We had an authentication piece that we had to do, and Okta had only allowed, I believe it was 3 redirect URLs. And obviously, because we've got a lot of apps and we easily exceeded the 3 redirect URL capacity. So what we had done was we got it to redirect to front door, and in the query string, we just pass in a certain UUID. And that way, using one Azure Front Door generic URL, we're able to pass it down to as many endpoints as we want, thus bypassing the 3 redirect URL limit. So there's a whole bunch of these conditions that you can choose from. It's like as you see in this list here. Whatever you choose from there, you can make the changes there and just override certain conditions if you want to. Another thing that we had done was, again, referring to the OWASP guidelines, what we had done was in the request header, we just append certain like prevent scripting attacks type scenarios. So we just added security headers saying you can only retrieve scripts from this certain web page, because say in our case here, our Moula website, we're just downloading scripts from only Moula website rather than any cross-site type scripts. So that these are the additional security headers that you could append on in this rules engine. So that's the web application firewall. And that's actually a very quick introduction into front door. Brad, you're just on mute.
Yeah, so let's talk about maybe inside the cluster now. So we've gone through the journey from the domains, the routes, the backends. Do we want to quickly show people what the Ingress object looks like? So we're using, do you want to bring up maybe the command line, Ben, and we can do some?
Yep.
So we're using, at the moment, we're using Nginx Ingress controller. So how we can, the traffic going into the cluster from front door, we can then define that as Ingress objects. So if you just go kubectl get ingress, and then namespace Kipton, let's do the Kipton example. So traditionally we were using external DNS and cert manager. So if you're not familiar with those, they're tools that go inside the cluster that can update your DNS records for you when you specify a Ingress object, and then they can issue your SSL cert as well. So this gets a little bit more tricky when you're doing multi-region as well, because you know, obviously you have more than one IP address that you need to go to, because if you go to region A then B, then it's going to freak out a little bit. So by leveraging front door, we can then say from this subdomain, you know, you can use host or path. From the traffic coming in here, we let front door decide where it goes to. So we can say either we want 100% to go to region A, if we want to have, let's say, different scenarios. So we can have active, we can have warm standby. It's particularly good as well to be able to change regions if we're doing maintenance on another region. So in the past, in another company, we when we're doing quite big updates on region A, we point front door to region B, then all traffic is going to region B. We can then work on region A, do the updates, confirm it works, and then we can flip it back over to the other one. So can you describe the dev? So, sorry, just go get ingress dev namespace captain. Yeah, correct. And then -o.yaml. And this will show us, this is the ingress object that we have. So you can see here, it's very basic. We just have the annotations of Nginx. And here, we don't even need to specify in the rules the host. So in the rules, all we need to do is path now. So we know that this is going to go to this particular service, which is, this is using Kipton. It's another tool. And then the service that we want to route to is name API-gateway-nginx on port number 80. So this ingress object will, when front door brings the traffic in, we then sort of use an ingress object to translate where that service goes when it's inside the cluster. So we use Argo CD to deploy to the multi-regions as well. So we're using a GitOps paradigm to deploy the same thing to region A and B, so they will always have the same ingress. So that's how we ensure that everything syncs, because otherwise we'll be running into trouble if it was different on one cluster to the other. And then we also go through the promoting the environments as well. So that's what it looks like inside the cluster. If anyone has any questions also as we go, please ask, and we're more than happy to answer them. So that's essentially what it looks like inside the cluster. And then Ben, if we just show them on Google as well, like it working live on Google Chrome. Yeah, so we can see here that, yeah, this is the domain that we're using in front door, and that's now going all the way inside to our cluster. So it's going, and then can we show them the slide of back to the endpoint manager? Because the endpoint manager is really where you spend most of your time configuring this. So we know that it's going into the custom domain. It's then, yeah, so it's going custom domain. We've set that up. We've added a CNAME record that says point whatever you want to Azure front door. And then it will just go back, sorry, Ben. And then we've got the origin group. So this doesn't have to be Kubernetes as well. You can use a lot of other services, like if you're still using web apps, things like that. API gateway, yeah, there's many things you can use with it. The only thing is if you do use those services, they need to be in the same subscription as front door. And then the routes as well, so the paths. So you can do some really fancy things there as well. So we've found that when using multi-region, it is good to, front door has been good because it does, as you do multi-region, it does get a lot more complex as well. So we've found that front door does take a lot of that complexity out. And then, yeah, can we go back to the diagram as well, Ben? We'll just quickly talk over that also. Yeah, so in the next chat as well, we'll talk a lot about how we've implemented these AKS clusters as well. So you can see we're using the Azure Container Registry. So we have a geo-replicated container registry as well. We're using identity for the AKS cluster. So if region B goes down, it's still going to work because it's geo-replicated over to region B at the bottom. We're using a hub and spoke topology as well. So you can see on the left, we have Azure Firewall, Azure Bastion service as well. So if we do need to troubleshoot, we can log into there as well. So that's protected from our private cluster. we also use Terraform to spin all this up as well. So you can see we have the geo-replicated key vault, and we've taken off application gateway because we just simply haven't needed it anymore. There is some minor use cases that you might still want to have application gateway if you want to do more stuff inside the VNet, but we haven't required that being in the Kubernetes cluster. And then, yeah, you can see log analytics. We use Dynatrace as well, so that that works for us quite well inside the clusters too, and especially syncing. So, yeah, if there's any questions, do we have any questions, Sarah? No? Okay.
No questions at this stage.
Okay. So we actually finished a little bit faster, actually. That was more half an hour than an hour, but
well,
yeah.
Another example of what we could use with this front door. I know we've been speaking mostly about Kubernetes in this instance, but other use cases for front door, if it's using a lot more Azure resources, you can use front door to, similarly in this origin group here, have a whole bunch of web apps, function apps that Brad had mentioned. So think of it like a Black Friday type sale where you're just getting hit by a whole bunch of requests at once. So having this multi-region type setup in this origin group, you can have a whole big pool of function apps that will just be able to consume all that traffic. And you don't need to change any of the connection strings or routes or anything of that sort, because you're still pointing to this one endpoint, like IO/Black Friday, for instance. And that will just divert all the traffic into that pool of, could be, and I didn't expand that, but it could be one function app, or it could be 10 or 20, and it still gets you to one of the function apps, and it just gets load balanced across based on your setting in the routing rules. Like, where was that bit about the origin groups? If I clicked onto one of those, it would say like, do you want 50% of the traffic to go to this point? Or, you could do a 70-30 split. It's completely an arbitrary number of how much traffic you want to each specific backend. Yeah, that's just some of the many ways that you could use front door.
Should we as well then do a should we do a demo of installing it, or we'll leave that for the next one? What are your thoughts?
We could do an installation, yeah. We add on to this one. So do we just add more function apps, for instance? Or
yeah, we can. Let's go through. Maybe like we can delete the subscription after and make a new one. So how about we, because we have quite a bit of time, why don't we do it like a full hands-on and spin up a front door live? How does that sound?
Cool. All right, let's do that. So just create a new resource in here. Actually, these are the front door parts that we were just showing. So yeah, that's what you would see here. If you added to this, you could add more things, and that was the weights portion I was talking about. So let's see, if we go back to the resource group, create a new front door instance. So there you go. You've got your standard premium front door, or I think that gives you the quick create, continue. That's your standard and premium. We're just going to go with standard for now. Let's call this. And this just gives you your Azure front door domain name. Origin type. So this is back to what we had mentioned before about what do you want to link to it. So a few options were app gateway, app managements, app services, And in the case of what we had earlier, we had connected it to a load balancer, which is a public IP type thing. And it's just one of the many public IPs. For now, should we just go point it to one of the app gateways? Okay, web application firewall policy. We'll create that after.
So you can see it's very easy to quickly spin one up for testing as well. You can use ARM templates and Terraform or other infrastructure as code tools, but what we've found is that generally it's better to do it manually, just because if you use custom certificates, etc., that can take quite a while to update. And I mean, there is certain things that you can use in infrastructure as code, but generally it is a harder tool to try and automate, just because of the times it takes to propagate records, etc. So we've found that you can automate somewhat of it. I mean, you can fully automate it, but we've found in our experience that it is better just to manually do it to start off with until it becomes out of preview and it's more stable. Then we will go to do that, because there's going to be a bit of a migration plan going on that Microsoft are working on at the moment, where you'll be able to easily migrate from version 1 to 2 seamlessly, which we're waiting for as well to use that. So automating it wouldn't have made sense at that time.
So it's just creating a bunch of, now it's creating the routes, which is what we had specified earlier. There you go. So we've created a reactive front door. Let's take a while. So there you go. So this is your default one that if you went to that website right now, I believe you would get a 500 status because it's going to an app gateway that we had not actually configured for this purpose. But yeah, that's how you configure it in your default routes. Sorry, you just need to hit edit before you go into it. There you go. From that domain, choose / anything. HTTP, HTTPS, it goes to the default origin group, which was what we had tied to that specific application gateway. You could always just add a separate thing altogether and name it something that's a bit more descriptive. App gateway, add origin. If assuming this is again a multi-region type thing, app gateway AU Southeast. And then you can fill that up like so. And these are the health probes that will just be constantly pinging your endpoint just to check if it's healthy or not. And that's how it works out. Say, right now, this only has Southeast application gateway, but if I had another application gateway that's in another region, it will be pinging the two of them just to see if they're healthy and whether or not to continue sending traffic its way. And this, yeah, you can figure how frequently you want it to ping. And this is where it pings it to, because not all instances, they would have something that returns on a /. Another trick that we had been using was just pinging and getting the favicon, and that generally would get you a 200 status. So this is something that you can use for your health probes as well. And let's just add that. I generally am not a fan of default origin group naming, just because that's not descriptive. Until you click into it, you have no idea what it actually is. And front door does quite a lot of things behind the scenes. So it does take some time for you to add or make any changes usually. All right, so now I've created that app gateway. We'll just reconfigure this to use that origin group instead. And once that's done, this will say that it's no longer in use, and it'll just get discarded. Taking a while. There you go. So by default, it actually removes the unnecessary origin groups, which you can always add back in. So this is just the list of all the origin groups that are currently existing in there. So you'll see the default origin group and the app gateway group that we had created. And it just tells you, yep, it's unassociated. So it's no longer being used by anything. And in this case, I would just get rid of it. Sorry, it does take quite an amount of time to run through all these things in Frontdoor for a bit. And the other thing, I suppose, yeah, it's the rule set that we can have a look at. This was the if this, then that set of rules that I had mentioned earlier when that thing's done. Failed to delete. We'll worry about that after. So rule set, like say, redirect mobile traffic. Add a condition. If the device type equals mobile, then do certain things like rewrite the URL, or you can just add in the request header that append, override, or delete. You can just go say if your app requires a certain header for mobile devices, you can just append stuff like origin mobile, something like that. So you're just adding more layers to the request, and it depends on how your backend is processing it. You can, after that, you can just add more things as well. Add action, modify response header, where you append another thing to it. So that's just a few ways that you can use this rule set. And this rule set gets associated with, I'll just scrap that for now, save. And this, you would put that into the routing rules. Once that's done, endpoint manager. So here, need to hit edit. So in this rule set, you can just apply that. And now anything that goes to reactor AFD / wildcard, you will have this redirect mobile traffic rule set applied to it. I believe this. So this is one new difference between Frontdoor version 1 and version 2. Version 2 now lets you apply multiple rule sets, whereas back in Frontdoor version 1, each route can only have one rule set. So this gives you more control, because in version 1, if say you wanted to have security headers appended to it and you wanted to do the mobile headers modification at the same time, you would need to create one specific rule set, whereas now it appears that in version 2, you're able to have multiple rule sets because you can move up, move down, and adjust. So yeah, that's a cool new feature in version 2, which hopefully we'll get out of preview soon. Yeah.
And what about the WAF?
Yep, I know. WAF. So to add one of these. So didn't have one. So just create a new, let's call this reactor WAF. This does, I believe it doesn't let you do dashes. Yep. WAF and apply that to that particular domain. So once that's created and creates the association, we'll go into it and I'll show you in greater detail what policies you can apply to it. All right. So manage rules, this is the standard OWASP rules, front door premium. We did it as front door standard, so it didn't come with the managed rules. But custom rules, this is the part that you'll be adding certain things. It's priority 100. If it's a location, size string, size. Generally, the ones that we've been using thus far has been IP address or geolocation. So this can be remote address does contain. So in this case, you can say block non-office traffic, for instance. So if your office has like a standard, static IP, you can go say, just random number for now. So you do this, and if it is not that specific IP address, then you deny traffic. So one of its IP, or you can do geolocation, and you can also have multiple locations, as in multiple conditions. So it's not this, and it's not, if you're having that specific IP address, you probably won't need a multi-part thing, but you can have, if your match type is based off a query string or something of that sort, if request header, say back to that origin mobile thing again, if origin is not value mobile, and you can do transformations as well, because in certain instances, if it becomes uppercase M or lowercase m, you can set the transformation to ensure that it's lowercase, and you URL decode it to make sure that it is one of this. Scrap that for now. If request header origin is not mobile, then deny traffic or redirect or log. So there are a few options that you can do. You either allow it through or allow it and log the traffic at the same time, or just direct it elsewhere. So these are the level of, fine-grained level of control that you can have over the firewalls in front door. Just go add that for now. Actually, I should rename that to mobile. If it's not mobile, then traffic, then deny. Great. And you have to hit save.
You could also talk about the feature where you can only accept traffic from front door for the app services as well, like the web apps, etc.
Yep. So that's also another method of securing your web apps, because your typical web app, it has its public web app name.azurewebsites.net, which you can apply firewall rules to it of putting certain IP addresses on an allow list and denying all other traffic. But it makes it a bit more complicated when you've got a big list of IP addresses that you want to allow. So what you could do is, in the networking section of the app service, I don't know if we've got a demo one that we want to show. Brad, you're on mute.
I was just
still on mute. Brad, you're still on mute.
Sorry, I was just going to say we won't show that today.
Yeah.
Just because this is the demo subscription, we'll delete, but the other one's in the actual one.
Yeah, so like what Brad said, in the networking tab, you can set the web app to only allow traffic from Azure Front Door and nothing else. So that way, if you're controlling firewalls, you're not controlling it in multiple spots where this particular rule that I had just created, you don't have to apply this to all 5, 10, 20 of your web apps. You just apply it in one spot, and the web apps only allow traffic from front door. And that way, you change it once, you change it across all 20 of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose if there's no further questions or anything else, questions from anyone?
No,
We
that's
haven't
great.
seen
Thanks, Ben.
any questions come through just at the minute. We'll give everyone just another minute to ask anything. Thank you to Brad and Ben for joining us today. We have entered in there the survey link with the event code 14255, and also, guys, the check-in links there, so you'll be able to get additional resources from today with that same event code. I don't see any questions coming through. You guys must have answered everything in your prezzo and your demo for today, and we look forward to part 2. So have a good rest of your afternoon, evening, and morning, and thank you both to Brad and Ben, and we'll see everyone again next time.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ben.
Sarah.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming, everyone.